Brothers, the Holy Qur'an tells us in Surahtul-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 282, Ya ayyuhal lazina amanu iza tadayantum bedinin ila ajalin musamman faktabuh. O ye who believe, when you deal with each other in transactions involving future obligations for a fixed period of time, reduce them to writing. So when we enter into an agreement, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding us that we should write those down. And it mentions there is also time factor involved for a fixed period of time. So if you lend money to somebody and he promises to pay you after a certain length of time, you must write it down. The reason being that sometimes, we are human beings, we are weak. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us, وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا, we have created the humankind weak. Sometimes we say certain things, but we mean something else. Sometimes we cannot accurately convey our thoughts. Sometimes when we do accurately convey our thoughts, these are sometimes misunderstood by the recipient, by the person who is listening. Therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands that we must write those down in order to avoid any misunderstandings which may give rise to certain feuds later. This Surahtul-Baqarah ayah 282 happens to be the longest verse of the Holy Qur'an, and it has in it numerous dimensions, numerous implications, and of course in a short period of time of a few 4 or 5 minutes you cannot even attempt to touch upon the depth of the directions given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I'll just attempt to read the first portion of it. First I have read, begins with, O ye who believe, when ye deal with each other in transactions involving future obligations in a fixed period of time, reduce them to writing. Let a scribe write down faithfully as between the parties. Let not the scribe refuse to write as God has taught him, so let him write. Let him who incurs the liability dictate. Let him who incurs the liability dictate. So the person who is obliged to pay back, he should dictate. But let him fear his Lord God and not diminish aught of what he owes. If the party liable is mentally deficient or weak or unable himself to dictate, let his guardian dictate faithfully and get 2 witnesses out of your own men. And if there are not 2 men, then a woman and then a man and 2 women. And if there are not 2 men, then a man and 2 women, such as ye choose for witnesses. So that if one of them errs, if one of them forgets, the other can remind her. And this message continues because it's a long verse, and 283 also reminds us that if you are on a journey and so on, and there's no one to write, then you can pledge, give something in pledge or security or a deposit, so that if somebody is borrowing money, they can say, okay, you keep my watch or you keep my ring until I pay you back. So that is also allowed if there is no writing. Something that puzzled me for some time, and that was some 35 years ago, a student from Wales came to see me, an Englishman, and he was interested in Islam. And he asked me this question. He said, why does the Quran say that either 1 man or 2 women? Are women deficient mentally? Why is this? And so at that time I didn't have such a depth of knowledge of the Quran or Islam. I still don't, but I know a little bit more now than I did 35 years ago. So I took him to Dr. Khalid Alvi, who was the director of the Central Masjid at the time. I happened to be the vice chairman at that time. And he gave the answers that our scholars normally give, that, a woman, she is accustomed to homely atmosphere. If she's put in the court, then she'll feel out of place and she can get nervous and so on. So this person, Bruce Eccles, he said to me that, look, I don't find this reply convincing. But nevertheless, the Quran is saying that, so I accept the command of the Holy Qur'an, I accept Allah's words, but this explanation given to me is not convincing. So then I took it upon myself to investigate this. And this then ended up in the form of a booklet, Why Two Women Witnesses. In fact, you'll find some on the table on your way out. You can have a copy if you wish. And so I investigated this. And indeed, when I presented this to Dr. Khalid Alvi, he was very much delighted. Sheikh Ahmad Didas was very pleased with it. And it points out the fact that women are biologically different to men, in that they go through certain cycles. They go through their monthly cycles, the antenatal, the postnatal, the pre-menopausal cycles, the menopausal cycles, the post-menopausal cycles. When they go through these cycles, it affects them physically, psychologically, and emotionally. And they can have this temporary loss of memory. In fact, what I've quoted in this booklet are American women senators who are saying that here we are sitting in the House of Senators, and all of a sudden we have these hot flashes and the memory has gone. So isn't it amazing? 1400 years ago, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that if one errs or forgets, the other one should remind her. So the Holy Qur'an is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is our creator, He is our manufacturer. He knows us better than we do ourselves. And therefore, these phenomena were not known then. And the contents of this booklet are still valid. The only development has been is that medical science has discovered that women have 2 brain centers, whereas man only has 1, generally. So with 2 brain centers, a woman is capable of doing multitasking, whereas a man can only focus at one thing at a time.